Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this informational webinar on what you need to know about youth employment and child labor, hosted by U.S. Senator Bob Casey's office in the U.S. Department of Labor Wage and Hour Division. We're grateful for everyone taking the time to join this call today. I want to start by introducing myself and the other panelists on this call. My name is Maria Hernandez, and I'm one of the U.S. Senator Bob Casey's constituent advocates. Also on this call from U.S. Senator Casey's office is constituent advocate Antoine Robinson. From U.S. Department of Labor Wage and Hour Division, we are excited to introduce Francesca DeRocca and Joanne Gregory. We're grateful for all of our panelists' willingness to join our office for today's webinar. Before we get started, I will quickly note that we will have a Q&A session via chat function available throughout the presentation. We ask that you please keep your questions general and short so that our panelists are able to respond to as many questions as possible throughout the course of this webinar. If you have questions regarding your own specific situation or more in-depth question, contact information for U.S. Senator Bob Casey's office and the U.S. Department of Labor Wage and Hour Division's contact information will be provided during the presentation for you to reach out directly. At this time, I'm going to turn the call over to Francesca DeRocca with U.S. Department of Labor Wage and Hour Division to discuss specifics. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria, and thank you for having us today. We are so excited to be here. My name is Francesca DeRocca. I am the Community Outreach and Resource Planning Specialist for the U.S. Department of Labor Wage and Hour Division. Ooh, take a breath. That's a really long way of saying that I get to do outreach and discussions and presentations to either employees, employers, advocacy groups, organizations, you name it, we do it. So a little bit about myself. I took on this role a few years ago, and prior to this role, I was an investigator for the Wage and Hour Division. I am based out of the Wilkes-Barre District Office. We have 3 main offices in Pennsylvania, one in Wilkes-Barre, one in Pittsburgh, and one in Philadelphia. Out of those offices, we also have different field offices. So us in Wilkes-Barre specifically, we handle the 38 counties in the Northeast central Pennsylvania area. We have covered the entire state. So I have myself and I have 2 counterparts that are in the other respective offices. Out of the Wilkes-Barre District Office, we have field offices in State College, in Harrisburg, and also in Allentown. So we cover a lot of area. We are a big state, so we do cover a lot of area. And what do we cover? Today, we're going to talk about child labor laws, but generally speaking, for your purposes, we handle the Fair Labor Standards Act. And with the Fair Labor Standards Act, that is a short way of saying that we handle minimum wage, overtime, record-keeping laws, and child labor laws. That is just what's covered under the FLSA. Briefly speaking, we also handle government contracts. We also handle agricultural investigations through the H-2A program, the H-1B program, and the H-2B program. I was forgetting what letter I was omitting in number. So we do a lot. In addition to those laws that we enforce, we also enforce the Family Medical Leave Act and also the PUMP Act for nursing mothers. So today we're just going to specifically be dealing with child labor laws. And also alongside me today, I have my district director from the Wilkes-Barre District Office, Joanne Gregory, if you want to say a few words before we get started.
After that wonderful introduction, I just want to say thank you for the opportunity for us to share our information about child labor laws. That is an important act for us in the Wage and Hour Division. We want our minors to work, develop good work ethics, but it has to be done in a safely manner, and that's why we're here to provide the information, how to comply, and what the minors need to do to keep themselves safe at the workplace.
Okay, so let's get started with going through this presentation because I know you're all on your lunch break and want to be spending your lunch hour with us, so we appreciate that. But as Joanne indicated, this is important. So I want to make sure that we get enough time and get the content discussed, and then also leave you an opportunity to ask any questions that you may have. And as Maria indicated, feel free to put anything in the chat, and we'll be moderating the chat during the course of the presentation. I will, Joanne will, and so will Maria. So there is, of course, my slides aren't advancing. There we go. So we could not give a federal presentation without putting our lovely disclaimer, just indicating that it's intended for general use and that it does not carry the force of legal opinion. Of course, we try and make it as information as current as possible and correct any errors if people bring any of that to our attention. And there's a lot of different content that's covered in here, and I'm going to be bringing up different sites for you to see as well, so that you can access our online site. But we always go by what the most current is. We try and keep our presentations current, but online is the best way to get the most up-to-date information. Okay, so today's presentation, we are going to cover youth rules, dangerous jobs for minors, categorizing into groups of 16 and 17-year-olds, 14, 15-year-olds, and you'll see why we broke it up into two, because there are some differences between the restrictions for the age groups. And then talking briefly about agricultural jobs, what you'll need to know and provide you with resources, and where you can go to reach us and get help if it's not specifically in our area. Keep in mind that even if you do, and I'll say it again later on, but as far as I know, I mentioned that we cover certain part of Pennsylvania, and we have our respective offices in Pittsburgh and Philadelphia. But keep in mind, if something comes our way and it's not in our specific area, we do work well with our sister offices to be able to cover the entire state. So don't worry about if you contact us and you're located out of Philadelphia, we're still able to answer the same questions. Okay, so youth rules. As Joanne had indicated, this is an important topic specifically because, we want to be able to allow minors to gain work experience, but also that it's done in a safe manner, that it's not going to jeopardize their educational opportunities, and that they're not putting it into a hazardous occupation. As a teenager, I think back to, I wanted to be able to earn money. So we understand that there is a need for minors to want to work because they want to gain money and they think independence, but gain some money to be able maybe to save up for their first car. But also mainly it's to help prepare them for the workforce for the 21st century. So you'll see here on the slide, I know Maria had indicated that this will be shared with you, but you'll see here on this slide that it is hyperlinked, and I'm going to bring you to the first hyperlink here, which is our Youth Rules website. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. So this is our website for Youth Rules. It's a great website, super interactive, helpful for all types of groups. So the important part to point out here is you can see there is a section for workers, parents, educators, and employers. It's not locked down, so you can look in the other categories if you want. But generally speaking, I'll pick on the youth workers. You can see here that it gives you information about if this is your specific age, where you would click on. If you're planning on working in ranches and farms, you can click on here. We have some great library video content, just general information, dangerous jobs, which we're going to talk about briefly in a few minutes. And then you can see here, these are some of our common child labor violations that we see coming through our office. And as on all of our sites, we'll get to this again later on, but all of our investigations are confidential and free. So you can feel free to call us and speak freely when discussing what issues you potentially have or you're coming across, or even if you have a general question, rest assured that if you call to ask us questions about ABC, employer, we're not going to just go in and investigate ABC employer because you called to ask a question about it. You have that right to give us a call to ask what your rights are, or even as an employer to understand compliance with our laws. My role as a community outreach specialist is for non-enforcement, and it's intended for that way for purposes of ensuring that this is the law and I'm going to teach it to you as I know it and understand it. And so there's no bias for either the employers or employees. This is what it is, and we just want people to be in compliance with it. So again, you can rest assured that calling us, whether you're on the employer side or the employee side, we will give you the same information and same guidance, and it is confidential.
In addition, if this website, if you scroll down, Francesca,
yeah,
we have a link to one important tool that we have not only for minors, but for all the workers, is our timesheet app This is really important because we don't only enforce the safety of the minors at work, we enforce that they getting paid correctly. So if they download this app to their phones, they can keep track of the proper hours work and make sure that they're getting paid correctly. Even this information in this app can be used for our investigations. They can share that information with us and we can make sure that they're paying correctly. And as I said before, this is not only for minors, it's for every type of worker that we should keep track of hours just to verify that proper payment is being made.
Excellent point. And to just, it's another slide that's later on in the presentation. So don't worry that you have to hurry up and try and get the QR code scanned now. I do have it as a part of our presentation so that you can utilize it later. And it is on both the Apple and Android platforms for you. Okay, and then just kind of going back to the main page of the youth roles here, you'll see that there's videos and they're basically asking questions, and you can see the short duration, again, common questions, other resources. So this page has a lot of great information on here and it's free. Another important piece to point out on this page, and this is on the main page of the youth roles, is that you'll see here the map of the United States. There are state and federal laws, and I will say it again when we get to that point, but whatever is the more protective standard is the standard that applies. So if it's a state standard that's more protective, then we abide by that. If it's a federal standard that's more protective, then we abide by that. But on this page, you'll be able to access the state of Pennsylvania, or if you're from a different state, maybe one of the surrounding states in New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, one of the closer tri-state areas, you can access the information for their child labor laws as well. Okay. Back to our slides. So we talked briefly about it, and I mentioned earlier that we covered the Fair Labor Standard Act, and that is the federal minimum wage currently is $7.25 an hour. Unfortunately, the Pennsylvania state is also the same minimum wage, so it is the same for both of them. Again, I do know that in the surrounding states that they do have a higher minimum wage. So for purposes of any Pennsylvania workers, both state and federal have the same $7.25 minimum wage, which means that for your first 40 hours, you would be paid a total of $7.20 at a minimum of $7.25 an hour times all of your hours worked. And as you can see, there's a notation for overtime for any hours that are worked more than 40 in a work week. And I specify work week. It's important because in the event that you're paid on a biweekly basis, you can't combine the 2 weeks to indicate that, you know, I worked 35 hours in 1 week and 45 in another. So a total of 80 hours in that pay period. Each work week stands alone. So if you're working more than 40 hours, you should be receiving time and a half, whatever your hourly rate is. You'll also see here on the slide too that we talk about paycheck deductions, any sort of deductions that come aside from state and federal taxes that are things that we have no control over, but things such as, let's say you're working in a daycare and they require you to wear a logo shirt with, you know, the company logo on there. Any deduction that they take for you for potentially for that logo shirt cannot bring you below minimum wage. Let's say, for instance, that you are a restaurant worker and somebody walks out on the bill, it's not your responsibility to pay for that, and to pay for that unpaid bill. And if they are taking any deduction out, it cannot drop you below minimum wage. And then the last bullet point on this slide is that training must be paid. There's different scenarios for training, but generally speaking, if it's not voluntary or if it's dealing anything relating to work or it's something you can't volunteer time, that time would be compensable time to be included in your hours worked for that work week. Okay, so let's jump into what are some of the dangerous jobs that are prohibited for individuals under the age of 18. As you can see here, there's these bullet points. And so the Secretary of Labor has deemed there are 17 hazardous orders in which minors are not permitted to work under the age of 18. So this would go for all groups. I mentioned that we're going to break this up into 14, 15, and 16 and 17. If a 14 or 15-year-old is working a job and it's prohibited under the 18 category, it's also prohibited under the 14 and 15-year-old time frame as well. And so here on the slide, I'll give a minute for you to take a look at some of the hazardous orders that are mentioned. But if you want some additional information, I have hyperlinked the word danger here, which will bring you to our fact sheets. I point out the fact sheets there on our website at dol.gov/WHD. You can access any of our fact sheets for free of charge. There's no cost for them. And they are, you can either alphabetize them or do it by content. Sort of what you're looking for in, like if you're looking for like record keeping, you can look under, alphabetizing. I wouldn't expect you guys to know which numbers are which. So I'm going to bring you to our fact sheet number 43, which goes into non-agricultural occupations that are hazardous and talks a little bit more about the child labor. So as you can see, I've clicked on the hyperlinks so that we wouldn't have to worry about anything not transferring over, but you can quickly see that this goes through, it talks about what the provisions do not for federal. Keep in mind, again, as I noted before, the state does have different laws. For instance, again, while I don't work for them and I cannot advise specifically on any sort of state laws, I do know for a fact that they do require working permits in the state of Pennsylvania. So that is something that differs. And in that case, that's when the more protective standard would apply, that a minor would have to have working papers when working in Pennsylvania. You'll also see here on this fact sheet, talking about the difference with the age employment. And then it goes through all of the hazard occupations. I'm not going to bore you going through them. And as you'll go back to my slides, but you'll see on the slides, we basically just kind of categorized what these hazardous order occupations, excuse me, would fall under. So just briefly showing you the 17 here. And it even goes into, we're going to talk about this in a few minutes as far as time and much. But again, you can access all of this information on our website. Or when you get this PowerPoint presentation, you can see the dangerous hyperlink will bring you directly to this fact sheet.
When it comes to hazardous orders, the most common violations that we have here that we encounter in our office is for roofing operations, like roofing occupations. We find a lot of violations. The other one that we have is driving, like 16 years old shouldn't be driving in public roads. 17 years old can drive, but under really limited conditions. They can only drive during daytime. They cannot do time-sensitive deliveries. So a lot of pizza places that use 17 years old as delivery drivers will be in violation. So when it comes to driving and construction, that's where we find most of our violations.
Yeah, great point. Again, I always talk about when I do these presentations for the driving for the 17-year-olds, nobody wants a cold pizza. So that's one of the reasons why they don't allow 17-year-olds, because they consider our hot pizza to be a time-sensitive delivery, which I would have to agree with. Okay, so age limits. Let's break this down into, like I said, the two groups, the 14 and 15-year-olds, and then we'll talk about the 16 and 17-year-olds. So the 14 and 15-year-olds, they have more restrictions on them. As you can see from the pay aspect in that first column there, they are, again, entitled to minimum wage. If they're working at a restaurant setting or somewhere where there would be tips, they are, permitted to do a cash wage plus tips, which would equate them up to a minimum wage of $7.25 an hour. One of the biggest differences between the two groups, the 14 and 15 versus the 16 and 17, is the time limitations. So they are not allowed to work before 7 a.m. We are coming up on the June 1st date, so they are permitted to work till 9 p.m., as you can see in that third bullet point. Currently, for the next, week and a half at this point, Joanne?
Yes.
They are only permitted to work up until 7 p.m., nothing beyond that. As you can see in the fourth bullet point, no more than 3 hours a day on a school day, including Fridays, no more than 18 hours a week when school is in session, no more than 8 hours on a non-school day, and they are not permitted to work more than 40 hours a week during a non-school time. So during the summertime, which we're approaching, crazy enough as it seems, we're approaching summer, this weekend being Memorial Day weekend, which is the kickoff of summer, not working more than 40 hours. And so as we just talked about all the dangerous jobs for the 16, 17-year-olds. And as I noted, anybody that's 14, 15 is also not permitted to work in those sorts of jobs. So this third column here kind of talks about things that they are allowed to do. They're allowed to work in food service jobs, retail jobs, working in an office, being a counselor or a tutor, and they can only lifeguard if they are 14 years old. But jobs generally that they cannot do. Again, I reference back to our fact sheet 43 that I had up previously, and that's also embedded in the slides. But just generally, they can't be doing any baking or cooking. Again, as Joanne noted, no construction work, cleaning any power-driven equipment or using power-driven equipment, unloading or loading actual equipment themselves, working in a freezer or cooler. So, for instance, if they're working in a restaurant and they're stocking the walk-in freezers, if they need to run in there to go maybe get a ketchup, that's one thing. It's a quick trip in there. But as far as like stocking the walk-in freezers or coolers, that is not permitted.
A common violation we find for 15 years old during the summer is like when they work at parks, golf course, at different places, they are driving the golf carts and they are not allowed to drive those or being a passenger in those. So that's a really common violation we have for 14 and 15 years old. The other one is the hours. We have a lot of confusion about the limit of hours they can work. So of the attendees at this presentation, if they are from a school, just make a point to take this knowledge to the minors and let them know the limitations of hours that they have, before Labor Day and after Labor Day. So how the hours change, and make them aware if that employer told them to work beyond that limit of hours, is their right to say no, because they're protected by the law.
Yeah, and from an employer standpoint too, we've had questions in the past that have come up as far as, well, we have a letter from the parent saying that they're allowed to work till 10 o'clock. That's not what's written in the law. And if, I think of myself when I want a sweet treat at the end of the night and they're open, my local ice cream shop is open till 10 o'clock. If I see somebody that looks a little underage there, they shouldn't be at least 14 or 15 working at the establishment. The places, they usually will go beyond that time, and keeping in mind, cleanup. The store might close, but there's still cleanup duties and, closing down duties that are to be done. So keep that in mind, that you, as a parent, you cannot waive your child's right to work beyond what the allowable permitted times are for the time limitations for 14 and 15-year-olds. Okay, so 16 and 17-year-olds, you'll see a couple differences here. One of the differences, we'll start with the pay column, is now you'll see the bullet point for overtime. That's in there because, as we had mentioned before, 14 and 15 cannot work more than 40 hours in a work week, but 16 and 17-year-olds are entitled to, because, as you see in the second middle column, there is no time limitation. All the working more than 3 hours, not working beyond 7 p.m. or 9 p.m. during the summertime. That is all gone for 16 and 17-year-olds. So that is one of the main differences between the two. But there is no difference as far as occupation-wise. They are still, 16 and 17-year-olds are not permitted to work at any of the 17 hazardous occupations. I will notate, as far as 17 occupations, there are some exceptions to that. There's exceptions to every rule, right? And with that, it is notated, I believe, in the fact sheet, but if not in our regulations, there are certain hazardous occupations that are permitted, but are only permitted in a work study or a bona fide apprenticeship program. It's not a matter of, oh, well, I'm going to call them an apprentice. They're learning here on the job. It has to be a bona fide apprenticeship program, papers signed between the school and the actual facility. And also same thing for like any sort of work study, student learner program. They have to be bona fide, legitimate signed papers between both parties for that to be allowable for some of the exceptions. Off the top of my head, I'm thinking, I think there's an exception for, I think there's one for baking. I'm going completely off the top of my head, but nonetheless, that information is contained on our website as far as the limited number of hazardous orders that do permit for an exception due to a bona fide apprenticeship or work study program. Okay, so briefly hopping over to our agricultural jobs. There are major differences between farms and non-farms, and they both have limitations and hour regulations, and definitely have different hazardous occupation, dangerous jobs that are mentioned, but the rules are applied a little differently in this sense. So you'll see this underlined is different. I hyperlinked our fact sheet number 40, which much like our other fact sheet for 43 for the non-agricultural, so you'll notice this is 43, which is for non-agricultural occupations. Fact sheet number 40 is for agricultural occupations. And again, you can find all information on here as far as age and limitations. And we're going to go through it pretty briefly regarding what you are permitted to do and what the differences are. Okay, so I'm going to go from the bottom up because I think it makes, you'll sort of see it builds, or from top down it builds. So 16 and above may work in any job at any time on a farm. 14 and 15, again, working on a farm, but they may not work in a dangerous job. 12 and 13, again, it builds on the prior age, and that you can work on a job, but must work with or have a written consent from a parent. So as I mentioned before, in the non-agricultural jobs that a parent could not write, permission for their child to work beyond a certain time frame. For farm and agricultural work, there are times in which consent from a parent is permissible. And then again, building on it, under the age of 12, may have jobs on a farm outside of school hours, but may not work in dangerous jobs and may only work on farms where they're not subject to the FLSA. Without going too in depth, we do have to have coverage, and there are different coverage rules in order for the federal ability to have jurisdiction over a work site and whether or not the FLSA applies. And without going too into the weeds with that discussion, that's what that point is that in order, if the employer is not subject to the FLSA, we may or may not have jurisdiction to do an investigation or have authority to enforce the child labor laws.
Talking a little bit of the most common hazardous orders that we find in agriculture, there are 11 of them. The most that we see for minors under 16 when it's applicable to them is operating a tractor of over 20 PTO horsepower. Operating is not only driving, it's removing equipment or seating or whatever they have to do. They shouldn't touch that equipment. This is one that is obscure, but is there. Working on a ladder or an scaffold of more than 20 feet high, they shouldn't be doing that. Driving a bus or truck or any vehicle in a farm, transporting passengers, they shouldn't do that. We see that in those places they have agrotourism, that maybe they have minors driving these big tractors, so that shouldn't be happening. And handling toxic agricultural chemicals or just spraying them, if you are under 16 and it's applicable to them, they shouldn't be doing that.
Great information to pass along to everybody. Okay, so we kind of briefly went over, the time restrictions, pay, what they can and can't do, job-wise, but now that you know what the rules are and what your rights, what should you do? So again, you know your rights, what you can legally do. You can politely say no. Be aware of your surroundings. Write down details of anything that makes you feel uncomfortable or unsafe. Be an advocate, and not even just for yourself, but also for your other colleagues. So maybe you're, over the age of 18, but you see something and learn something from, this brief presentation that a minor isn't supposed to do, and you can speak up on their behalf. Maybe they don't know. But you can also file a complaint, which brings me to another, again, that is hyperlinked, so you can access our website there. And once you click on that hyperlink, that'll bring you to our how to file a complaint page. And you'll see here that first and foremost, we have this in Spanish as well. So if you feel more comfortable filing things in Spanish, I should notate that all of our content, both fact sheets, presentations, everything. We have both in multiple languages. So if you're more comfortable in Spanish or a different language, we do have publications that are in multiple languages. But also, aside from a language factor, it's also important for you to feel that you can come to us confidentially and tell us this information without fear of retaliation of your employer. So we do have a law that we are enforcing, that employers are not to retaliate against their employees. So we don't disclose for any sort of complaint investigation. When we go out to do an investigation, we're not disclosing that it was a complaint. We're not disclosing that, oh, Joanne Gregory called our office to complain about her son, or Joanne Gregory herself, who is now under the age of 18, is working in a hazardous occupation. So you can feel free to, again, speak freely with us and openly with us. I always say, as a prior investigator, that you're the boots on the ground for us, so you know the information that's on site that we as investigators would need to look for. So the more information that you're able to provide for us, the better. And so if you feel more comfortable filing online, you'll see here on our website that you can either click on that hyperlink here that talks about reaching out to us online, or you can call our phone number here. It's 1-866-487-9243. That is our general line. And what that does, it is our call center is smart enough to recognize generally where your area code is and will situate you where they think your office is. So again, like I mentioned earlier, with having the 3 offices in Pennsylvania, maybe it's not something that we handle in Wilkes-Barre as far as jurisdiction wise, and it's out of Philadelphia, and it bumped you to our office. We would still be able to answer questions, take your complaint, and we'll route it to our local office if our call system inaccurately puts you in the wrong specific office. It's not for anything for you to worry about. It's more just so that you rest assured that we will get you to the area that's closest to your employer, so potentially our office can do an investigation. And we keep you up to date with what's going on with the investigation as the complainant. If you are called, you could be a third-party complainant. You don't have to be the actual worker there. If you have knowledge, you can call and do a third-party complaint. We will keep you abreast of where we are in the investigation process.
Francesca make a really good point about being the advocate for the minors. It doesn't have to be the parent. It could be a teacher, or you are in a store and you see a minor and it's late. You can call us. You're driving and you see a minor working on a roof without protection. Let us know. We can show up the place at the same date or close to that, or whatever incident that you feel you're not sure something funny is going on. Let us know. One of our biggest cases in Wage and Hour, it started because a teacher noticed that the minors were falling asleep during class, and I don't know, started talking to the minors, and she found out that they are working at night cleaning meat packing places with dangerous chemicals, and they're working like the night shift, and it was a really egregious case. It didn't happen in our region, it happened in the South, but that case started because a teacher got concerned about why his students were falling asleep, and that has been one of our biggest cases in the recent history of the Wage and Hour enforcement of child labor. There are millions of child labor CMPs that were assessed. It was all over the news, and it just started because one person cared about what was going on with their students.
Yeah, and also it's a great point to bring up that case. I know when you're talking about it was big, and it was just somebody cared about the student. But importantly, I also want to mention that regardless of immigration status, for us, it doesn't make a difference whether you're an immigrant or not. You are still entitled to the same rights working here in the U.S. If you're working here, regardless of your immigration status, we do look into the complaints. So that's nothing for anybody to worry about on that aspect. So
Jessica, we do have a question in the chat. Are these laws only covering U.S. workers in U.S. companies on U.S. territory? What about U.S. companies with international subsidiaries and international workers? Thanks. Great presentation.
Thank you. So in order for us to be able to do an investigation, it does have to be within the the limitations of the United States. So if they have a headquarters here in the United States, we are able to potentially do an investigation. Again, we didn't go too much into the coverage piece of it, but generally, if they're international, they probably would be covered. But the actual physical site of work, if it is outside of the United States, we do not have jurisdiction to do an investigation. I hope that answered your question.
Yes.
Okay,
Yep.
so we talked about filing a complaint. Just briefly, what happens after a complaint is taken? If this is something that we, all our complaints are reviewed by our managers, and we have limited resources, but in the significance of child labor, that is something that we put on of priority to go out and do investigations of. And if a complaint becomes an actual investigation, just generally speaking, this is our investigative process. So we hold an initial conference with the employer, and we'll request documentation from that employer and ask them, how their business is run, just to understand, pay practices, how they're capturing hours. We would be conducting interviews on site with the workers. If you don't feel comfortable with being spoken to on site, we can always give you our business card and we can call you and do telephone interviews if you feel more comfortable speaking outside of your employer's establishment. And so during the course of the investigation, the investigators will then review the records that are received from the employer and consider the interviews that are conducted with the employees. And then after all that is considered, if there is an issue, violation either of minimum wage or overtime, or if there's a child labor violation, we do hold a final conference with the employer to discuss what the violations are, advise of them and how they can fix them, how they can come into compliance. It might be a situation where, if the person wasn't paid proper minimum wage or overtime, that we ask the employer to encourage them to pay the back wages to the employer, and we oversee the payment of those back wages to make sure that they are in fact paid back to them if it's something that is found. And again, all through this entire process, we do not disclose the reason for the investigation. If it was a person that told us that there was an issue, or if it's a situation where we're looking at specific industries or a specific area, we have various ways that we do investigations, and we never disclose to the employer, regardless of the type of investigation that we're doing, what brought us to that specific establishment. So in addition to the back wages, it's also possible that we can assess civil money penalties, which Joanne had mentioned earlier, that we associate with the child labor laws. And I would be remiss if I didn't tell you that the civil money penalties, which we affectionately call CMPs, have increased significantly as of November of 2023 with regards to the child labor violations. And so we really are encouraging employers and employees to be educated about the laws, not only just to protect the workers, but also to prevent any assessment of penalties potentially down the line. So that's another, a plug for my job. If you have anybody that needs information or wants a presentation, we do all our presentations and we'll tailor them towards the needs of either the employer or the employees, an advocacy organization, whatever it may be. We try and get out there because, as I mentioned, we have limited resources. So the best way that we can try and utilize the resources we do have is to teach individuals of their rights and then teach employers how to be in compliance. So in hopes that you're not having an investigator come and do an investigation of your establishment.
There's a question in the chat.
Sure.
Do you only do investigations based on complaints, or does DOL do regular check-ins or monitoring visits on employers who have minors working for them?
So we, as I have mentioned, we do complaints, but we sometimes will do industry specific or locality specific. Like maybe we're going to look at all, this specific area in Wilkes-Barre or a specific area in Allentown and do investigations regardless of the type of industry. So we can do an investigation, not necessarily that is complaint based. Do we do drop-ins? So we don't necessarily do drop-ins, but if we have information from somebody that there's a minor working on site, we do, if anybody alerts us to those situations, we do send an investigator out that same day to ensure the safety of the minor if it's a hazardous issue, or if we need to assess to see that it's 10 o'clock at night and this 13-year-old is working at a stand.
Yeah, but regardless of how the nature of the investigation, if it's industry directed or a complaint, the process is going to be the same. We're going to have the initial conference, the interviews, the review of the records, and the final conference. So the industry, we call them directors or complaints, the process is always going to be the same. Now, our goal, as always, is educate the employers, empower the employees, and achieve compliance.
Okay, so just sort of rounding out our presentation, how can you learn more and follow along? I created a slide that has quick to all of the links that I was showing you today. The one that I didn't show you, and I'm going to click to show it to you now, that I find to be really helpful. It's a one-pager. You'll see here about what your rights are, know what they are, and it breaks again down to the age groups. Okay, and we also have this in Spanish, which you'll see it's hyperlinked on the screen. But all of the links that I have clicked on today, even though they're embedded into the actual presentation to make things easy and useful for you to access, I added the slide in with the hyperlinks, and in addition to this one-page flyer here. But you'll notice there's a lot of great information on here. Aside from just talking about what your rights are and breaking it down into the groups, the different age groups, you'll see here at the bottom, you can QR code, you can scan this and it'll take you to our sites for the youth rules. And we'll bring you to that, one of the other links that I had showed you. And again, importantly, our information, where you can access us, how you can get in touch with us, our general website, our phone number to contact us. So this will give you all of the information that you need just on this one slide. I mean, on this one flyer. And again, like I said, we do have this flyer currently. We have it in English and Spanish. I don't know that we have it in the other languages at this point. I know that's something that we're working on, is getting different flyers in different languages. But this one specifically, we have in English and Spanish for everybody. And as Joanne mentioned earlier, we have our timesheet app, and you can scan the QR code there to be able to download the app. And again, it's on both the Apple and Android platforms. You can just see briefly in the left-hand side, you can capture the hours that you're working. You can capture any sort of break hours, and it'll show you how many hours you worked that entire day. You can total up your week to see how many hours that you've worked for the week to make sure that you were paid for all of your hours worked, and compare it against your pay stub to make sure that it works. I thought there was another slide there. Sorry, I must have accidentally deleted it. We do have another slide that has our information as far as following us on social media. We are on Twitter, which I now think is called X. We're on Facebook. We have Department of Labor blogs. But you can see while I'm deleted the page, you'll be able to see here on the slide. These are all of the icons of the social media platforms that we are found on, along with our own platforms that we have on our website. You can access on dol.gov. And so at this point, I'm going to end my slideshow and kick this over to Antoine to wrap up the rest of the presentation.
Thank you, Joanne and Francesca, for your key information on what to know about youth employment and child labor. I'm now going to provide an overview of how U.S. Senator Casey's office may be of assistance to constituents regarding labor and employment issues and navigating other federal agencies. Next slide, please. How can we help? Senator Casey's Office of Constituent Services consists of a team of constituent advocates who assist in and with those experiencing issues with the federal agency. This includes, but is not limited to, Social Security benefits, emergency passports, IRS problems, VA benefits, immigration snacks, housing concerns, and more. After receiving written permission, our office is able to follow up with the federal agency on the constituent's behalf to check on the status of pending application, claims, or appeals, or ask questions, relay information and concerns, and demonstrate Senator Casey's interest in the matter. Under laws and rules of the U.S. Senate, we cannot force the federal agency to act in someone's favor. It is important to note that if we cannot provide assistance, such as with state or private entities, we can refer constituents to someone who can best help. Next slide, please. Labor casework. With regard to labor and employment issues, we can reach out to the U.S. Department of Labor on the constituent's behalf to try and assist with a variety of matters, including workers' compensation. We can also reach out to OSHA regarding workplace safety. If you're facing discrimination, we can follow up with the EEOC. If you were employed and are having issues with your federal pension or retirement, we can reach out to the Office of Personnel Management. If you are a small business owner with questions on loans or repayment options, we can reach out to the SBA on your behalf and ask for a fair and full consideration on your case. Next slide, please. If you would like to request assistance from Senator Casey's Office of Constituent Services, either with the U.S. Department of Labor issue or an issue with another federal agency, please do not hesitate to contact our office at 717-231-7540 or toll free at 1-866-461-9159. You can also reach out via Senator Casey's website at www.casey.senate.gov/contact/assistance. Next slide, please. At this time, we will open it up if anyone has any questions for the Department of Labor or Senator Casey's office. If you have a question, please click on the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen, and I will call your name and unmute you. We're going to give a few minutes for those that do have a question. You may also feel free to put your question in the Q&A if you prefer.
Maria, I think there's two people, if I'm seeing this correctly, that have their hands raised.
Oh, okay. Let me go ahead and take a look.
I think you guys are more well versed on the WebEx.
Okay, let me see. You all. Okay, yes, okay. Dan Vost, one moment. Let me go ahead and unmute you. Hi, Dan. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm Dan Bost from Senator Chris Gebhardt's office. I wanted to ask, what is the likelihood to get businesses to train CTC students to do work with their supervision? So businesses are dying for employees. How can we get them, the high school employee without having somebody from their business be inconvenienced in getting a teacher's certificate or something like that? Thank you.
Joanne, you're muted.
Sorry about that. I think that is a question related to the ETA, the Training Enforcement Agency, because our agency, we only leave it to the enforcement of wages, hours, and the child labor regulations. But when it comes to training, they will be better suited to answer that question, because if I understanding that they have those programs that work with school, with employers, they have workplaces programs that provide certificates, but I'm not familiar how they work.
Okay, well, what I'm getting at is the Country Made Cabinets builds $1 million kitchens. So do they have are they going to teach the student better, or are they going to learn better from somebody at the CTC who has a certification because the state said that they needed to get it? They're probably going to get a better learning experience at the company, Country Craft Kitchens, who is building $1 million kitchens all over Lancaster County.
Yeah, I mean, I understand what your question is. As far as our ability to enforce anything or to have country made kitchens teaching an employee better than, the CTC that you're referring to, we don't have the ability to instruct an employer how to run their business per se. When I would do investigations, what we would say was like, we can't instruct you how to be an employer, but these are the laws that you have to enforce from wage and hour would be the Fair Labor Standard Act. So we can't enforce how they would teach or not teach an employee how to do a specific position or job. I know that doesn't really answer your question. It's unfortunately not anything in our wheelhouse that we're able to advise on.
Okay. Well, possibly then maybe somebody from the team could reconnect with me at a later date and we could discuss that offline.
Yes, so our office, Team Casey here, we can go ahead and speak to our regional manager to see how to best go about and provide further information. So let me go ahead, just make a note, okay,
I
to
appreciate
get in
it.
contact. Yeah, of course.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And then the next person that raised hand is Cam Anderson. Hi, Kim.
Hello, how are
Yes.
you?
Good. How are you?
I'm fine. So we're in a little bit of a unique situation up here. We are considered in the entertainment business because we have a seasonal. We're in the haunted industry. We run a haunted hayride. So we've been considered entertainment in the past. Is that going to continue? Are we going to have separate things like we did last year? Permitting that we're going to need to do this year as well, above and beyond these regulations that you guys have put out, today, the guidelines today that are separate from what you guys talked about today?
You want to take that? Or
Yeah, so I only know this because we do have a great relationship with our state partners at the labor law compliance. I know in the past there has been discussions that there is a requirement for permitting on the state side. So this kind of falls into that area in which when the state standard is the more protective one, that would be the one that would stand. So in this case, if you are being required for permits and such regarding your entertainment and the haunted attractions, you would still have to apply for whatever they're requiring you to do.
Okay,
It's
fantastic.
not anything that we federally enforce. Again, we're more like, best way that I could put it, aside from like the child labor stuff, if you work 10 hours, you get paid for 10 hours. As the easiest way that I can explain it. But as far as like the permitting, like I noted earlier, for child labor, we don't require working permits, but I know the state of Pennsylvania does. So if it's something that the state's requiring you for permitting, you'll want to check with the state standard on that.
That's fine. We're well prepared for it. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't missing anything.
Yeah, from federal, we don't know. I just recall from conversations that we've had with the state that that's something that they require for the haunted attractions.
Fantastic. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, does anyone have any other question? Please raise your hand, or you can post it in the Q&A chat function. So we'll
While
give it
we're still
about.
waiting for everybody to decide whether or not they want to ask a question, I just want to take the time to thank you all for joining us today and allowing us to be present to have this conversation. As we mentioned, that it's a very important topic, and we would love to continue the conversation if needed. Feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions. Like I said, that all of our information is free of charge. Even giving us a call, there's no feeling that you have to give your name or provide information that you don't feel comfortable providing, but we're here to answer your questions. One of my bosses previously told me that it's funny to hear the federal government say, "Hi, we're the federal government, we're here to help." In this situation, we actually really are. So any way that we can help you understand our laws better or be in compliance or know what your rights are, we are here to get that information out.
Thanks so much, Francesca. So I don't see any other raised hands or any other questions in Q&A. So we'll go ahead and move to the next slide, please. Okay, so this webinar was recorded and the recording will be shared with everyone who registered. We thank U.S. Department of Labor Wage and